paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bryant, and welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast. Today, my guest is Derrick Broze. He's a journalist and also an author. And he's written a series of articles about ritual abuse in Utah, which I found to be quite interesting. I've been looking into this case, and his articles have been very balanced and measured. And welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast, Derrick.
Thanks for having me on, Nick. I appreciate it.
So on Tuesday, May 31st, the Utah County Sheriff's Office released a statement detailing how, quote, multiple county and federal agencies are investigating reports of ritualistic child abuse dating back as far as 1990. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was, as you said, an announcement came out at the end of May, right at the beginning of this summer from Utah County Sheriff's Office. And it was pretty much just a press release. That was all. It was maybe 2 paragraphs. And pretty much what you said there was the gist of it. They named 3 different counties. They said multiple agencies at the beginning. They didn't name which agencies. They just said multiple agencies and 3 different counties, abuse taking place between 1990 and 2010. And they specifically said ritualistic child abuse. And so I heard about it a couple of days after that, and started to contact the police, the public information officer, to try to get them to define what they meant by ritualistic, and just started investigating it, and it led to the 5-part series I did. But the interesting thing about this case, besides that announcement on its own, that I think is newsworthy, and probably people like myself and yourself who investigate these kind of things, it sets off alarm bells like, what's going on? There's a sheriff investigating claims of what now? And so I was already curious of that, but then the more I looked into it, it got even weirder, and it has multiple layers. And essentially what happened is within 24 hours of the first announcement by the sheriff's office, the Utah County attorney in the same area, his name's David Levitt. And as I came to know when I started to investigate Utah and then the Mormon church and just a lot of the stuff going on in that area, there's a lot of families that have been there for hundreds of years, pretty much since the founding of Utah, the frontier days, kind of homesteading in that area. And of course, many of them involved in the Mormon church. So the Levitt family is one of those. David Levitt's the county attorney. His brother was formerly the governor. His father is Dixie Levitt, very powerful man in the insurance agency. So, not an inconsequential character. And he responded to this announcement by the sheriff's office by holding his own press conference, where he distributed what was described as a 51-page document that was labeled victim statement number 3. And he distributed this to the local media, and without anybody, mentioning his name at all, said, "I'm not a cannibal. My wife is not a cannibal. We are not murderers." And he said, the sheriff's announcement, it's politically motivated, and it names me in one of the victim statements. And he distributed that victim statement to show it to the media. And he said the statements were made by a tragically mentally ill woman, that the case was dismissed because it was, found to be unbelievable and all these sorts of things. And, at the same time, everybody is sort of just like watching, like, where, you just sort of inserted yourself into this thing. So the sheriff held another press conference and sort of responded and said, "We're not going to name any suspects at this point. This is ongoing investigation." They wouldn't confirm nor deny that David Levitt was, a suspect in the investigation. And they said, "This isn't political." The sheriff seemed really determined to just find out where this goes. And it's just been evolving the last 3 months. Recently it's been kind of silent, but that's sort of where things started.
So they spent a year investigating this before their press conference, before the sheriff's press conference. And
Yep.
He is the sheriff of Utah County, and Utah County is Provo. Utah is in Utah County. It's the 3rd biggest city in Utah, and also Brigham Young is in the university is in Utah County. So Levitt came out and said that he wasn't a cannibal and a murderer in his press conference, and he disseminated this report, which I'm assuming had been very confidential prior to that. But the county prosecutor Levitt has had some issues with honesty throughout this investigation. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's where it's really been, I don't know, just kind of baffling, to be honest, because you would think if Mr. Levitt, who is the county attorney and did recently lose the election, so he'll be a citizen of Utah come January 2023, but currently he's still the county attorney. It's really baffling because he just keeps inserting himself into this, not only with the initial press conference naming himself when nobody was naming him at all, which I don't know, some might say that looks like somebody who feels guilty or something and they want to kind of preemptively, I don't know, I can't claim to speak for him, but it was odd nonetheless for him to do that. And as things progressed, he continued to give interviews to the media and to make statements that we've since found out were lies. And of course, the first thing was the statement I said before, that he said the person was tragically mentally ill, that the case was dismissed because there was lack of evidence, unbelievable, etc. Well, myself and a few other independent journalists and some of the local media in Salt Lake City did end up getting copies of the document that David Levitt was talking about. And the document was a part of a much bigger document dump related to a case in 2012 involving another man that we don't know for certain if it's even related to the main case. Like, that's what's so weird, is David Levitt just kind of inserted himself there, but we have to assume it probably is, since he felt so not a cannibal and defend himself. But those documents, that case from 2012, it was actually, we came to find out, was dismissed in 2014. And it wasn't dismissed because of a lack of evidence. It wasn't dismissed because the person was crazy or because the judge thought it was preposterous or any of the things that David Levitt claimed. In fact, going back and looking at the transcripts of the court hearings and listening to the audio recordings, we found out that, in fact, that both judges, the defense and the prosecution, seemed to admit that the charges that the man was facing in 2012, where David Levitt is named, were pretty strong charges, and that he was facing life in prison if found guilty. But there's no mention of these, there's no evidence here. So it was dismissed without prejudice, which means it could still be retried again. And this is why, some are speculating that if David Levitt is implicated in some way, or at least concerned, he's trying to get ahead of the game and kind of try it in court of public opinion, so to speak. And he attempted to say, this is all politically motivated because the primary elections are coming up. They're just trying to get rid of me. And the sheriff's office, swears that that's not the case, that they are focused on getting to the bottom of it. So David Levitt lied about the victim, the alleged victims. He lied about why the case was being dismissed. And then we've also come to find out just more indications of his type of behavior, that he is under investigation, whether same case or separately, by the Department of Homeland Security for potential trafficking claims, at the very least, bending adoption rules. He has a Native American girl in his family that has been in his family, I think, for over 15 years now at this point. But
Definitely get into that a little bit later.
Okay.
So the Levitt said that that the 151-page police report was a baloney, and that he'd been accused of being a cannibal and murder and things like that. But actually, the county prosecutor before him said that he could not go forward with the case because the Division of Child and Family Services was not cooperating with them.
Yeah.
So he could not get records. And the man who was charged with multiple counts of child abuse.
Absolutely. And that was admitted to as well. I mean, in the, not only in the transcripts, we have all these different cases, but in some of the files that were sent to me as well, we have the video files from the witness testimony, the police cameras, and several times it's admitted that this man, David Hamblin, not David Levitt, the first man we're talking about, but David Hamblin, the man accused in 2012, he's a therapist. Him and his wife are definitely, they admitted to being involved with certain things. They were never tried. They were never found guilty. But it's in those documents related to his case that David Levitt and David Levitt's wife are named.
And victim number 3 accuses Levitt of being with that perpetrator in a house that basically is pandering children. And it's kind of interesting that he would go that route, saying that the person, that victim number 3 that basically named him, was mentally ill and all these other things. So what's your take on that, on why he's come up with these fabrications?
You know, I think it's hard to know for certain. I mean, obviously I don't mind sharing my personal opinions based on the research and everything I've seen here. I think it seems clear. Well, we know that David Levitt's already lied several times. We know that he's under investigation related to the other charges I was discussing with the adoption by the Department of Homeland Security. There's some other portions of his life that I think haven't been fully explored. His connections to Ukraine. He has the Levitt Foundation that is based on bringing democracy to Ukraine, and he's been going there since 2014. And when this whole recent Ukraine situation started, he said there was reports that he was going to Ukraine to go to his apartment to collect some important things before things got too heated. I think there's an unexplored connection that could potentially relate to the human trafficking or trafficking of children, if that is what he's involved in, because the victim statements and the documents that we have, they do at least 2 victims, or at least 2 statements, name David Levitt and his wife, and some of the others that the things they describe, even the ones that don't directly involve David Levitt, make it clear that what these victims were describing was an organized ring, sex rings with various people, and a hierarchy of people, you know, with different titles and different ways. And even sometimes the victims say they heard incantations or mentions of Lucifer or Satan and things of this sort. So whatever David Levitt is wrapped in, my suspicion is that he is probably feeling the heat right now. I mean, I don't really have the highest hopes, as probably you don't, and maybe much of the audience doesn't, in the FBI or, you know, any of these, the Department of Homeland Security. And but I think it's clear that he there's a reason he put his foot in his mouth. I don't think he would have said that if he didn't feel like he was, you know, under some kind of pressure and felt like, okay, this is the best move I can make. You know, let me get out in front of them and try to say, hey guys, I didn't do this. I'm not so sure. You know, he definitely seems to be sweating.
And you described it as a preemptive strike. Now, even before he ran into this controversy, his office shut down Utah County's Special Victims Unit. And he took a lot of heat for that, because the Special Victims Unit was a unit that was actually focused on victims of sexual abuse and trafficking. And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was definitely a decision that I would say contributed to the various politicians in Utah County wanting to get rid of David Levitt. Again, he was trying to claim the announcement of the investigation in May, only 4 weeks before the Utah primary, was politically motivated. As you mentioned earlier, the sheriff said they've been investigating this since April 2021, so well over a year. You know, it could have been that they chose to announce it at a certain time and there might have been political motivations, but that also doesn't mean the information and the investigation against him, or, you know, that he, you know, inserted himself into, doesn't have merit as well. So it could both be politically motivated as well as, you know, legitimate issues here. But he has had this reputation that people have wanted to get rid of him because of shutting down the Special Victims Unit. But also there's a couple other cases, and these were all reported on local kind of Fox affiliate mainstream news in Salt Lake City, that David Levitt had been accused of essentially, you know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of things, where he was getting some of his buddies and associates out of various accusations of crimes. I reported on at least 2 different instances that I found. I know there was more. One of them was like a handyman. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but he happened to be friend with David Levitt through the church, through the Mormon church. And so, you know, he sought to get him a lower sentence. And there's another one where a woman was actually being harassed by an ex-boyfriend or an ex-partner of some sort. And again, David Levitt knew the man through the mission at the LDS church. And the woman felt there was like a conflict of interest when he was trying to get her to accept the deal to keep the man from getting in trouble. And she knew they had a relationship. So he's had a history of not just shutting down the Special Victims Unit, but kind of looking out for people who are part of his circle, I guess, and bending the rules whenever it doesn't suit him.
And actually, this woman claimed that this guy, a friend of David Levitt's, was actually stalking her on multiple occasions. Yep. Stalked her, and I believe that she's suing the county right now.
Yeah.
She didn't think that her case had been adjudicated fairly. And this is kind of interesting. A local TV station released a video of Utah County Attorney Levitt discussing how he used his political influence around laws regarding adopting Native American children. In the video, Levitt explains how he brokered a deal with the Northern Cheyenne tribe in Montana by telling them he could sell their buffalo in the Ukraine, and that he would, and then somehow he ended up with one of the children who was adopted by a family member of his. You were getting into that. Could you talk a little bit about that? That's very,
yeah,
that's a very strange
it's some weird stuff. Like, it's not only the Ukraine connection, but the way that he is, again, somebody who's clearly trying to use the bit of power that he has to benefit him or his family. You know, I don't know why he specifically wanted a Native American girl, but there definitely is a history and an epidemic of trafficking of young children off reservations and you know, all sorts of things like that we've seen. So I'm not claiming that that's what he did, but it's definitely something that's under investigation as far as we know. So he, again, used his power to try to say, well, look, I got these buddies over in Ukraine and they don't have any buffalo. You guys have an abundance of buffalo. I can set up some deal and, you know, you can start making money and maybe, you know, you can help me get a young girl from your tribe. And he had some difficulties doing this. And for whatever reason, in this documentary somebody was filming, I guess he was just talking off the cuff and they just happened to be recording. And that eventually that clip of him kind of describing the whole process of how he said, yeah, I just got on the phone. I said this thing and that thing. And then before I know it, they said, okay, you got a kid on the way. And, you know, he just talked about how he was able to overcome the roadblocks by brokering this deal. And I don't know if the deal ever went through or if it was just him talking, you know, a big game, but clearly he's willing to do things like that. And so that is what we know now. And that local report also shows a Department of Homeland Security agent who was actively investigating David Levitt for this case, who was then removed from the case by Department of Homeland Security. And they show like his actual letter from them where he put in a whistleblower complaint, basically saying like, hey, I'm investigating David Levitt. There's something going on here. And I've just been taken off the case. I think there's some malfeasance going on. They said they investigated it. They found nothing. So, I mean, the case could already have been snowballed. It might have, you know, already been covered up, but there's at least one guy, that guy speaking, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, with the Homeland Security team, who said that this investigation into David Levitt regarding this Native girl and the adoption was being considered for potentially a trafficking case.
Yeah, he was investigator Engels. And,
yeah.
And he had been looking into David Levitt and trafficking allegations even before this. And it's kind of interesting. So David Levitt goes to the Cheyenne tribe and says, let one of my family members adopt a child and I will sell your buffalo. That is that doesn't sound quite right to me.
No.
I don't think that that's how things are done in Utah or anywhere else, but I could be wrong. I'm not familiar with the mores of the Mormon church. But you were very definitive about this. You were not going after the Mormons. You were just reporting on a story that if this had been Catholics or Methodists, you would still be reporting on the same story.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this Homeland Security investigator is yanked, and it's kind of interesting. There's been a history of ritual abuse or allegations of ritual abuse that have come out in Utah. And in 1992, there was a report that was released. It was the report of the Utah State Task Force on Ritual Abuse. And it had a couple of conclusions that were kind of interesting. It concluded that ritual abuse was happening, but that it didn't permeate every level of the state and did not go to the highest levels. And you talked about that in your articles. Could you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so there was this. I thought this was an interesting piece of history. So, the story we just described was kind of the beginning of my investigation. That was like, okay, this case is going on, ritualistic sexual abuse. I'm going to follow that. But while we were waiting for updates for the case, I started to kind of broaden my scope, and also people started to reach out to me and were sending me different reports and things that they've heard, or telling me to look at this various source and this issue and this and that. So I decided to look at the history of accusations of child sexual abuse, ritual sexual abuse, those kind of various cases in Utah itself. And I was surprised not only that I found reports of this, in so-called, kind of conspiracy circles, but that there was actual state government task force, and there was reports that you were mentioning that were actually put out in the early 90s. And so the first one was the report of Utah State Task Force on Ritual Abuse. And as you said, they did describe that there was this ritual abuse taking place. I feel like the first report, this one that came out in 1992, the commission started in 1990, and then by 1992 they issued the report. This one seemed to be staffed by particularly this one woman who was definitely, I think, open to these things. I wouldn't say Naomi Mattis, that's her name. She's still around as far as I remember, but she was somebody who really believed that people could recover their memories over time, and recovery memories of abuse specifically. And so now 30 years later, people kind of look at this report and they think that her presence, at least let's say the mainstream version, they try to say this woman has an agenda to promote, satanic panic, etc. But at the time, the report seems to have been taken fairly seriously, and it came out and it was drawing these conclusions. And the woman, Naomi Mattis, also did say that it was difficult, though, for them to prove these cases, not only because statute of limitations or people being afraid to speak out, but she claimed that they are pretty good at the people involved in this were, quote, experts at hiding their tracks. So I thought that was interesting. And that report itself concluded that the state should appropriate a couple $100,000 and then hire more investigators. And they didn't follow the exact recommendations. Like, they wanted them to hire 4 investigators. They only hired 2, but they did continue to investigate it. And that led eventually to another report.
And what did that report say?
So the second report was a little bit more skeptical. And this one is interesting because there's a gentleman named Mike King who was involved, as I show in my report. This is, I think, the third of the fifth one, or the fourth or the fifth one of my original investigation. After the recommendation that the Utah Attorney General's office hire 4 investigators, they hired a man named Mike King, who had been involved with, background noise. He'd been involved in previous investigations in Utah into a cult that was called the Zion Society. And that was, again, another piece of history that I wasn't very familiar with. This cult was early 90s, 1991, and it was a sex ring. And it wasn't satanic per se, but there was some ritualistic elements going on. And there were multiple people. There was a guy named Arvin Shreve. It seemed to be kind of based around him. So in this case, maybe like a cult of personality with ritualistic elements that did involve sex stuff, sex relationships, apparently kids going on, things like that. I found an interview with Mike King just as recently as a couple years ago. He did with this one podcast where he was describing it. But again, he seemed very skeptical that any of it was satanic. He believed that these things do take place, but he said, like, he was trying to, I guess, not necessarily downplay. I feel like he was trying to take as objective as a stance as possible and saying, like, some of these things are ritualistic, but they might not count as what people consider to be satanic. Some of them even have almost Christian trappings to them, but there's still like a ritual. There's a ritual to them in the way that the abuse takes place and things of that sort. But the Zion Society was something that Mike King had been investigating. And so after that, he got hired to do this second report by the Utah Attorney Generals. And that led to a 2.5-year investigation, which concluded in 1995. So we have one in 1991 and then again in 1995. And Mike King and another investigator, Mark Jacobson, they basically investigated more than 125 cases of ritual abuse. And again, his view tended to kind of be a little bit like, he didn't go, I think, to the same conclusions as the first report. He even sort of downplayed it. He said allegations of organized Satanists, even groups of Satanists who have permeated every level of government and religion, were unsubstantiated. But he did, again, say that these things do exist, they can happen, but they seem to kind of believe that in most cases, it would just be an abuser trying to scare a victim by pretending and saying like the devil's going to come get you, or, saying some kind of scary thing. And I don't think that, and I think you probably know this as well, that can account for every single case that's out there. And definitely it can account for everything that I've heard and read about going on in Utah.
Well, it's interesting. Ritual abuse is such a hot topic. And I think one thing about our society, when beliefs, there was a lot of, when the satanic, quote unquote, satanic panic occurred in the 80s, people were willing to listen to just about everything, all the allegations. And then the pendulum swung to the other way to extreme skepticism, to the point where ritual abuse doesn't exist. And what I've found quite interesting is I think the two most malignant life forms on the earth are serial killers and child molesters. And the FBI says that serial killers engage in ritualistic abuse, but yet child molesters don't engage in ritualistic abuse. So I've always thought that was very contradictory, that serial killers are ritualistic, but child molesters aren't. And I'm not necessarily saying that Beelzebub is involved, but you don't need Beelzebub for ritual abuse. There are cults within Christianity where it's been claimed that there's ritual abuse. So the Zion Society was, would you have considered that ritual abuse? What was going on there?
I do think it was ritualistic. And even Mike King, who is the skeptic investigator, admitted that what he saw there and what he witnessed there, it was ritualistic. Again, it wasn't satanic per se, but it involved a structure, a hierarchy of people, a guy who was the cult of personality. And he kind of told them that they basically need to have sex with him, but have sex with each other. And that was the key to enlightenment in some way. And so everybody was kind of initiated into it. So there was there was rituals going on. It wasn't just like he was sneaking up on somebody in the bathroom late at night and abusing them. There was, a group setting, and, there was a ritualistic component.
And then there's Warren Jeffs, whose father, Rulon Jeffs, was the head of the Mormon Church. Could you tell us a little bit about Warren Jeffs?
Yeah, that one is, so as I started to, like I said a moment ago, I brought my investigation into Utah, but then I started to get more information about the Mormon Church itself, and then people encouraged me to look into that. Prior to this investigation, I honestly didn't know much about the LDS and the church beyond, basic information. But I've since come to realize how powerful they really are as an institution. They're one of the number one landholders. A lot of attention is being paid to Bill Gates, but people should also look into how much land the Mormon Church owns, as well as owning numerous TV stations, radio stations, media companies that create streaming shows that people might not even realize are being funded by the LDS Church. So they're a lot more consequential than people might think. And the situation with Warren Jeffs is interesting because, the beginning of the Mormon Church, you had the practice of polygamy, and it was pretty core to their beliefs. And as well as, other things like blood atonement rituals, those were all very early on. And most of those have now been, like, we've been told those aren't part of the modern mainstream Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, the LDS. But there are other denominations or sort of, fracturing of that original church that have continued to practice polygamy. Now, of course, more secretive because of laws and things changing, culture changing, things of that sort. But yeah, others who think that the main church has lost its way because they're not extreme in this particular instance. Just like any tradition, they have fractured. And there's the church called the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, so the FLDS. And that church was run by Warren Jeffs, as you mentioned, and his father, Rulon Jeffs, before him. So, I just want to make that clear, because every time I talk about this story, there'll be some, Mormon follower who says, like, that's not us, but there is a historical connection, but recently, no. However, I think there's some debate about that, but essentially what happened is that the FLDS turned into a cult around Warren Jeffs, because the problem with the church, at least the problem that I see, and I think the danger, more than, it's a danger, is that in this particular belief system, and this is in other traditions too, you can find it, but that when you get to a certain position in the church, you're seen as a prophet. You're literally seen, you're not a god per se, but you are viewed, as kind of more than human, almost like as a perfect being here, a representative of God, almost something like the Pope or something of that sort. And obviously those situations, like that kind of authority over other humans and giving, that sort of like looking up to and putting on a pedestal is just a situation ripe for abuse. And that's what happened with Warren Jeffs and his situation of taking not only just numerous wives, in some cases voluntarily, but in many cases, like then taking other people's daughters, whether willingly or not. Sometimes even his own children were involved. And this all got exposed in the last decades now that's come to light. There's documentaries out and things of that. But what I think is really interesting is I don't really feel like even the mainstream has the full story on this. They talk about the abuse of what Warren Jeffs was involved, the polygamy, but he also was abusing his own children, and people in his own family were abused. There's been suicides by one of his sons, and that whole thing. I do encourage people to look more into it. Like I said, there's some documentaries and things out there. What I talk about is Brent Jeffs, who wrote the memoir Lost Boys, where he describes being sexually abused by Warren Jeffs and his brothers and other family members. And he said this happened when he was 5 or 6 years old. And so, I mean, there's the information is out there, and Warren Jeffs has been held accountable to some degree. He's been locked up, but he still appears to be giving orders from the church, and some people still do view him as like the true prophet. And I don't know that when you look at the charges he was found guilty on and what he's in prison for, it's not for raping kids. It's not for, he still has not been held accountable for all the things that he was involved in.
Well, his dad was the president of the Mormon Church, so obviously his father wielded tremendous power. It's kind of interesting how the Mormons make people prophets before they die. Catholicism has been around for a couple thousand years, and they figured out that you can't grant someone sainthood until they die, because then you're going to have to take orders from them. So the Pope might have to be obsequious to this saint. So Catholicism decided, well, we better wait for people to die before we make them saints. But Mormonism hasn't been around as long as Catholicism. Maybe they'll learn that lesson at a certain point. And then with another church president, there's some allegations about his daughter and son-in-law.
Yeah.
That he reported on. Russell Nelson, the president of the Mormon Church.
Yeah, that one is another situation that is, what I learned as I started to investigate this, Nick, is not just this particular case, but all the stuff involving the Mormon Church, that a lot of these allegations and these concerns are pretty well known within the church, but they're kind of like in the realm of like legend or myth, sort of like urban legend. People hear whispers of this thing, or I heard this thing might have happened, and you either get get one of two reactions. You get like vitriol, how dare you question the prophet, or this person is, how dare you even fathom that idea. Or you get people who strongly believe it and who have left the church because they say they, woke up to the church at some point and started realizing there was things going on behind the scenes that they didn't really approve of or want to be involved in. And it's no different when it comes to Russell Nelson, who is the current president of the LDS, and he's the oldest living president now. As you said, there's some accusations involving his brother or his daughter and son-in-law. And there's I will say that I have even more information on Russell Nelson that I just can't corroborate just yet, and I hope that soon there is some way to corroborate that, we can safely and accurately report on it, because a lot of it gets into some of the realm of speculation. Now, I will say one thing about this, because in the article I focus on Russell Nelson in a recent report, how there was a lawsuit that did get brought to the court, and then it was dismissed with prejudice, which means that it's, apparently that case is done. It cannot be brought forth. But earlier in that article, I talk about this other situation that I just wanted to mention, that there's a connection between the two. I talk about a book from 1993 called Paper Dolls. His full title is Paper Dolls: Healing from Sexual Abuse in Mormon Neighborhoods. And it was written by two authors, two women, and they used fake names, talking about being abused and talking about living in a home, and that their parents were secret alcoholics and this and that, and lots of disturbing abuse. Well, it is believed that Paper Dolls is actually about the Nelsons, that this is describing the same situation that I report on here, that there was a case about in 2018. We can't currently prove that. Paper Dolls came out in 1990s. These recent accusations are 2018, but I do think that you can kind of see that there's some overlap, because when they dismissed this recent case, the defense against what was only described as Doe 1 male defendant and Doe 2 female defendant, who had touching parties. Well, that's exactly what Paper Dolls describes too, that there was touching parties involving different Mormon leaders. And, it could be different touching parties. Unfortunately, it could be that pervasive, where it's not just one group of people having these touching parties within the church. But yeah, there's that belief that these two cases are the same thing, that the daughter and the son-in-law of Russell Nelson have been involved in these touching parties, sexual abuse, since at least the 90s. The claims go back to the 90s, late 80s, and that Russell Nelson himself, obviously being the church president, has been involved in.
What's interesting is there was a mother who you talked to who claimed that, who alleged that her children were abused by Nelson's daughter and son-in-law. And she said that she went to the police and that they just ignored her. And then she said that she went to Mormon church leaders, and they said something to the effect that forgive and forget. And that was all that was done because of her allegations. And she was quite disillusioned with the church.
Yeah, and it's so that feeling which you're describing in that situation, I think, is something that probably more people than we know have experienced, because the cases that I described were mainly historical, some of them last couple years. But then my most recent investigation, I don't know if we have time to get into that today, which is another 3-part about other church leaders within the Mormon church, where there is clear documentation of a bishop abusing his own daughters, similar allegations of what we described here. But when people try to bring it, to the attention of church leadership, it's either ignored, or, as you said, kind of like they're either just like, you need to pray about it, or handle it within the church. And this is all being corroborated now in the mainstream. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, the Associated Press, they put out a big investigation where they were describing similar things that we're describing today. And they actually showed the mechanism that the church has this helpline. So if somebody needs to report something about abuse or anything like that, they call the helpline, and the helpline is staffed by lawyers to help kind of redirect it and keep it from getting outside of the eyes and ears they want it to get to. So, I mean, I think that it's not just the Mormon church. Of course, we already said that, but there definitely is a problem within the Mormon church. And this has been all news to me that I've been learning more and more the last couple of months. And as I've started to examine some of the evidence that people have been sending me related to Mormon church leadership, the accusations against Russell Nelson, but then previous church president before Nelson, Gordon B. Hinckley, accusations against him going back to the 80s and 90s again. And, now being confirmed with reporting by the Associated Press, like there's clearly something going on here that I think is more than just a few bad apples.
It's very disturbing that when people report child molesters to law enforcement just ignores them. I saw that firsthand with the Franklin scandal, where social services went to law enforcement federal and state law enforcement and told them that there's a pedophile network that's being run by Lawrence C. King, and they were simply ignored. And then Epstein victims. Maria Farmer went to the FBI in 1996 and talked about Epstein's pedophile network, and she was simply ignored. And then we've got the case of the Finders, also, where people were just simply ignored. And these were law enforcement officers that were ignored. So we have history repeating itself in this case, it seems.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is like it's the same pattern from what you covered with the Franklin scandal, Nick, and from some of the work that myself and others talked about with the Finders and Epstein. I mean, it's just it's the same pattern of abuse and neglect and victim blaming that I think is still holding out. The case that I mentioned, like I tried to report on some of these things, even if they're 30 years old, 20 years old, because for one, a lot of the people who must have been involved in various elements of keeping things quiet or covering up or however you want to look at it, especially within the Mormon church, those people are still alive. Those people are still living. And if there is truth to some of these claims, then I think they should be brought to the public's attention so we can have a discussion about it. And ideally, anybody who was involved in cover-ups or abuse themselves, obviously be held accountable. And if the victims have the opportunity to get some sense of justice.
Well, Derrick, it was reading your articles was very elucidating. And as I said earlier, you were very precise and very measured about what you said. There wasn't any wild surmise or extrapolations. And it'll be interesting to see what this next series of articles beholds. And thank you so much for coming on the Nick Bryant podcast.